Thank you all again for joining us this morning to take in the viewing of Parched, the Art of Water in the Southwest. My name is Eric Caldwell. I'm part of the Amerind Foundation staff, and we're going to move into the second part of our program now, which is to take questions and answers from people who are part of the project. For those of you who would like to participate in our Q&A in your Zoom function, you should see a Q&A chat box. Both my colleague Annie Larkin and I will be monitoring that chat box, and we will be tossing questions to the panelists who have joined us here today. I did want to say that if you would like to learn more from the artists in this program, we do have a continuing series of webinars at Amerind that runs throughout the year. Artist Kathleen Vello, who did the photograms of water, working with Ernest, who's here on our panel today, is going to speak on July 24th. Neil Galloway, who examined the costs of water, and his piece Groundwater that you saw early in the documentary. He's speaking on July 31st. In the month of October, Deborah Edgerton, whose watercolor works celebrated the regrowth of algae in Fossil Creek. She's speaking on October the 9th. And Sean Scavland, who did the large installation piece with all the cattail fluff, cattail down. He's going to be speaking on October 30th. And now I'm going to toss it back over to the curator, who was the leading force behind the show, Julie Comnick, and we'll start to ask some questions. And to kick the questions off, I'd like to ask you, Julie and everybody else on the panel, I know this is a recurring project of the Flagstaff Arts Council to convene scientists and artists around a particular theme every few years. How do you choose that theme, and how do you get the artists involved?
Thanks, Eric. I'll actually briefly respond to that, but if you wouldn't mind, I'm also going to introduce the panelists here this morning. Great, thanks. So just to start off with, we have a number of combination of artists and water experts and collaborators joining us this morning from all over the map in Arizona. So that's really exciting. So we have artist Glory Tacheenie-Campoy, who many of you might have seen her artist presentation several weeks ago here at Amerind. It was wonderful. Dr. Jane Marks, biologist at NAU, Roger Clark, and also Ernest Taho. So I'm going to have each of them further introduce themselves when we launch into one of our first conversations here. But just a little backstory to how these projects come about. This is technically the third biennial rotation of the arts and science collaborations that have come out of Flagstaff Arts Council and Coconino Center for the Arts. So typically a topic is selected based on community input, and then a group of steering committee members comes together and plans what was in this case the water science boot camp. Some of our water experts today participated in that boot camp also and can talk more about that. Then the artists have a year to 18 months to create new works on the theme or topic, and then that's showcased in an exhibition free and open to the community, which thank you, Eric, again for hosting Parched at the Amerind Museum. I think it's a really wonderful venue for the second exhibition of this project. And with that, I'm going to ask each of the panelists if you could further introduce yourselves. I'm just going to create a little context for that, and then hopefully some audience questions will come out of this. So, as the documentary explores, collaboration is really at the core of so many of the artist projects. And each of the panelists here today have collaboration with an artist as part of their contribution to the project. So I was hoping we could actually just go through each of the panelists, and if I could ask you what your background is, what brought you to the project, and then also if you could briefly remind us of the project that you collaborated with and how your collaboration really helped shape the content behind the project. And Ernest, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to start with you, and if you could tell us a little bit more about the water filtration project that you've been behind for so long, and then how the collaboration developed with Kathleen. That would be wonderful. And Ernest, you are currently muted. Thank you.
Can you hear me now? Hi. Yeah, my name is Ernest Tahoe, and I live up here in First Mesa area, and I was in collaboration with Kathleen Zelo. I don't know, can you hear me still? Okay, yeah, we worked together. I was invited first by Benali to address the boot camp up in Tuba City. And there is where I discussed on my project on the water filters to get into Hopi because of our high arsenic levels in the water here. So from there is when I got asked by Kathleen if I can help her with this project. So I was happy to oblige with that. Being out here in Hopi, the water is sacred, so it was kind of hard for us to get water samples at first, but we worked on an idea on how we can do that and address that. So that was something that we worked together, where she was able to get her photograms of our water samples for this project. Thank you.
Thanks, Ernest. And perhaps if we have more time later, you could even let us know more about where you are in the water filtration project. Do you want to do that now? Let us know where you are in the project.
Sure. Right now, our project, we associate with other non-profit organizations. Our main source for these filters are coming out of Seattle, Washington, with the Clean Water Foundation. They're the ones that are supplying our filters here. We started originally with the single units, but then we addressed the uranium issue and the vanadium issue with a second unit. So we were running with the 2 units, but now we decided to just basically handle everything with reverse osmosis units. So that's what we're getting now, receiving. And so far we've got over, I think about 200 filters here, but since the COVID has happened, we kind of slowed down on installing them. So we're hopefully the Hopi Nation will open back up here soon. So we'll start back up on the installations.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ernest. I'm going to turn it to Roger. Roger, could you talk a little bit about how you came into the project and then your collaboration with the research with Neil?
Sure. So I'm Roger Clark. I, at the time, was the Grand Canyon Program Director for Grand Canyon Trust. I've since retired. I've had a long-standing interest in water in Arizona. I was born and raised in Phoenix. I did my undergraduate degree in forestry at NAU in the early 70s and came back after graduate school on the East Coast and teaching at Berkeley to my home state, and have been here ever since. I've been a river guide, an environmental educator, a museum exhibit director, and a number of intersections with kind of the whole concept. I felt honored and very appreciative to be included in the boot camp. I know from my own experience how powerful the storytelling can be when you give creative people like these wonderful artists some rich subject matter and turn them loose to come back with the most amazing visual and audio performances that I can imagine. Neil and I hit it off just talking, I think, on the boot camp, and I was trying to make the connection between the production of electricity from coal in Black Mesa and Navajo Generating Station and the rationale for that whole operation. The fundamental need was to provide inexpensive power, electricity for the Central Arizona Project, which has a price structure of water, as I explained in the documentary, that makes it quite inexpensive, at least at the wholesale level, for the use of water in the desert. By the time it's treated and delivered to places like Carefree, the town of Carefree pays about as much as Flagstaff pays for its water. So it really is something that has been an interest of mine for some time, particularly as it relates to the upstream impacts of the power production and the impact on the people and the air and so on. So that's how it came together.
Thanks, Roger.
Sure.
Jane, if you wouldn't mind further introducing yourself and talk about your role collaborating with Deborah or any of the others.
Hi, good morning, everybody, and thank you for spending your Saturday morning watching the documentary. My name is Jane Marks, and I am a stream ecologist or freshwater ecologist because I work on more than just streams. And I'm at NAU and also with the Center for Ecosystem Science and Society. And I feel like I worked with all the artists because I was largely in charge of designing the boot camp. And so, it was my challenge was to figure out how to teach as many issues about water in a week and to try to get as many different voices from the community like Roger and Ernest to come and talk with the artists and share their perspectives. I ended up working, in a little more detail with Deborah because she became interested in the algae and particularly in the algae in Fossil Creek. And so that Fossil Creek has always been one of my main study sites here in Arizona to push for and study the restoration. And, I'm trained in many ways, but one of the ways I'm trained is as a phycologist, which is a person that studies algae, which is a pretty niche field. And so I was pretty psyched to find out that Deborah really wanted to go in this direction. And so we collected samples and she came to my lab and we looked at stuff under the microscope and we ID'd it. And it's a collaboration that's going to continue because she's really interested in developing the microscopic world in some of her watercolors. And so we're actually going to meet next week to talk about going into the field and teaching her more about algae and other ecosystems.
Thanks, Jane. Glory, I'm wondering, as an artist, if you could speak about how you collaborated with any of the, water science experts, but also I'm thinking with your project, one of the things that didn't end up in the documentary that was so important was the collaboration with materials that came from New Zealand. If you'd like to talk about that for a little bit, I think that's really interesting how you bring materials together and that takes the form of things that, speaks to so many different realms of this project. Gloria, you are muted.
I had Julie and everyone there that came here. I had quite a nice okay. Shayden and by the way, Holiday Nasha, Kianin, Ibitoni, Abashashin. I am Diné Navajo from Northern Arizona, from the Baadue area, but also Coppermine, Page, Tuba City area as well, where clan-wise, my relatives are from. And thank you for being here. I grew up on the reservation in at pretty much sheep camp, raising sheep with my family, helping, and we didn't have running water or electricity, pretty much on our own, with family supporting each other. So a lot of things were all handmade, and that's where I learned to appreciate art and craftsmanship. And also we had to make things to trade with other tribes, Hopi, Zuni, tribes in the area. So my family were weavers. We also raised sheep to trade as well with other tribes, or tribes that didn't have mutton, lamb. So we traded for crops with Hopis at Monkopi, and also traded in Flagstaff when there was an annual powwow where there were many other tribes which we traded with. This is when I was very young, and so we practiced the culture much like the Hopi. Water was very sacred and much a part of the practice, the cultural practice. And then we also had a farm where family members divided up areas to grow crops. And then I went to boarding school, which took me away from family for a while. And then after that, I went to Flagstaff. There was a boarding school there, finished high school, and then went to college. And then grad school at the U of A here in the American Indian Studies, which had just started its program. It was a wonderful program with some Native scholars that some of are well known, like Vine Deloria Jr., Scott Mamaday, Thomas, Dr. Thomas, Leslie Silko, Nancy Treviso, Tom Holmes, and so on and so on. So those were our mentors at the U of A here, and the program is still going. So I was introduced to a different way of thinking from studying in a non-native philosophical thinking way of life, I guess you might say. But I'm very grateful for that. But I've always had support growing up wherever I went. Someone was always there to help me. And so that's what I try to do. But I also have learned to speak out a little more, because when you come from a tribal community, it's usually the tribe, the family, and individualism is sort of not a goal in a sense. So that sometimes you learn how to balance that. And then I also come from a very diverse family now in terms of race, culture, religion. So there's many different members in my family now. And so you learn to get along. And so as far as the art goes, a friend of mine, Melanie Yazzie, is a well-known artist. She invited a group of us to New Zealand, and they had a gathering of Indigenous artists come together to make art. And there we made paper. They used flax. Flax is a big, important plant in their culture, and they use it for many things, much as the Indigenous people in the Southwest use materials, clay, and materials for weaving, plant materials for basketry. So much like that, the flax is used a lot. So we made paper, and then they also came to the US, and when they came, they had a piece of cloth that they gave us as a gift. And I used that in this installation with the word water, their water. The word is printed on the fabric, and I did send them images so they're aware of this project we're doing. And so that's a little bit about the New Zealand connection. Let's see, what else did I forget? Anything to mention?
That sounds great, Glory. Thank you. Every time I speak with you, I learn more about the depth of your work. Thank you. Eric, I want to turn it over to you. I see a few questions have come in the Q&A, and I was wondering if you want to direct us towards one of them.
Sure. There's a question from Jean-Francois. What about using art for political purposes? Is it totally utopic to consider showing this amazing art show to somebody in Congress? Who would take the lead in pushing laws to protect access to water, as it's such an enormous issue for our nation, and the need for reducing the waste of clean water and fighting pollution sources?
Thanks, Eric. And that's an excellent, complex question from the audience. So thank you. It actually ties together. So I'm going to direct it with what was my next question here. Just thinking about how art, is, I guess that's the question to the panelists, is, and if so, how is art an effective vehicle to speak to these ideas? And the audience member put it in terms of political. And I think on one hand, the public exhibition of art inherently becomes, or at least maybe perceived as, political, regardless of necessarily the artist's intentions behind the work. It's a big, big topic. I think we could have an hour-long discussion on just that. But does any one of the panelists want to speak to their own thoughts about art as political, or who this exhibition could reach if it were, if the right audience came to it? Volunteer. Roger, great.
Just briefly, I think it'd be wonderful to get the documentary in the hands of all the Arizona state legislators, as well as some of the department heads for the Arizona Department of Water Quality, just as a means to open up the dialogue. I think Clee said, he welcomes the dialogue. I think we all do. This becomes performance art, in a sense, political performance art that can crystallize, I think, in meaningful legislation and changes in how we treat water in Arizona. And I'll stop there.
Jane?
Yeah, I think the question's great. I really appreciate it. And, I'm not coming to this from the perspective of a curator that needs to find, or is challenged to find venues for the art. But the question just makes me think, after the shows at Amerind, and I really thank Glory and Eric for the opportunity to have this show up at your prestigious museum for so long, to think about, like, maybe we could get it in the lobby of, some of these fancy buildings where the, Arizona Water Resources is, or in the, lobby of the state capitol or something. We would have to, this is more work for Julie, because she would have to, think about reframing, reorganizing it in a very different space. But I really do like the idea of putting it in places that aren't actually art museums. And to challenge a whole different kind of audience to look at it. And so, I'm happy to help work on that in a year from now. But we have a year to work on it because it's got a nice home until then.
Jane, I think that's a really good point, and that was another topic that I had on hand to bring up is and again, reaching back to Amerind as such a perfect host institution for this type of exhibition. And on one hand, thinking about how the art museum or the art gallery can be such a suitable space to ask big questions, because it creates that space for asking questions and thinking, oftentimes, when done successfully. And at the same time, the art museum and gallery comes with a certain set of limitations, the audience it reaches, all sorts of things like that. So perhaps that's something we could speak to more, but I agree 100%. Finding venues that support a wider range of audiences could be a really interesting direction to go. Eric, do you want to direct us to another question?
Sure. Question from Dan. It is my understanding that the water allocations in the Colorado Compact were based on a period of unusually high rainfall. So what happens as climate change reduces the amount of available water even more?
That's probably one for Jane or Roger to tackle.
I'll take so yes, you are right. It was allocated in a time of plenty. And even without climate change, it was over allocated. With climate change, the problem's, much more severe. And, I'm not a water policy expert, but I can say that we don't have an answer to that yet. That there's multiple states that are involved in the agreements and the allocation patterns. The tribes, have some voice in it, but their voice is not as strong as it should be. So I think there's a lot of, people like Ernest and Roger that are advocating for a stronger, better voice for tribal rights. And I think that went to one of the other questions I saw up above. And then, we're really, I like to be an optimist, but we're really, there's a lot of power in rethinking how we're using water. And so, Josh's photographs and Neil's work really spoke to kind of the craziness of using water in a water limited system to be growing alfalfa that's exported to Saudi Arabia. And so we do, like anything else, it's a lot of political will and, public support that's going to be needed to start rethinking how we use water, how we value water, if and how we price water, so that we can, come to some better resolutions before we end up just in conflict. I mean, we're already in conflict, but in more conflict.
I can comment briefly that there is a water shortage plan in place for the Colorado River and the 7 basin states. It's being revised actually again this year. This summer likely will be the first time the existing plan is put into effect, such that not everyone will get the water that they're allocated, and those that will lose water first are kind of the last in priority. So Central Arizona Project water is 4th priority, so it's near the bottom of priority. First priority, at least in the lower basin, are the communities located along the Colorado River, including tribal communities. But it's a complicated and very political process. The Secretary of the Interior has the lead on implementing these plans, and there has been numerous calls through the years to redo the entire 1922 Colorado River Compact, where it was based on an assumption of more water than is actually in the river. I'll stop.
I just want to say something from the perspective of the Indigenous people perspective. They have stories, old stories, emergent stories that talk about these events that are happening now. So, and pretty much we know that this has happened before through the stories and the cultural practice, the ceremonies, the religion. And some people have passed on whole tribes like the Anasazi in the year 1200 is what the scientists and archaeologists say, but those are also in the indigenous stories about these things happening. But I think that people don't appreciate looking back and thinking about those stories, reading and learning about those stories. But there are more people now, so I think it will probably get worse if climate change isn't taken seriously. And you only have to remember the toilet paper issue. Remember what happened? Well, what will happen when we run out of water? So that's my comment, kind of just to bring it back to reality, the toilet paper issue. Hoarding toilet paper. So people may start hoarding water.
Absolutely. Thank you, Glory. Ernest, do you have any perspective you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, sure. With this, I was, honored to be a part of this, and for the water issue and climate change, things have been happening, and I know in the Hopi culture, there had been prophecies of things happening as like right now, scientists are saying that the northern magnetic pole is shifting off to, I think, to the east slightly. So that was one of the things that have been taught in Hopi prophecy, that there'd be a time that things would change. Mother Earth would be, I guess, more or less reclaiming of what she wants back. And so this is part of the things that are happening now, you know, like with the weather changes, droughts, severe weather storms that are coming, snow happening in May still, you know, it's pretty strange, but yeah, things are happening and we need to address these climate issue changes in order to I guess, basically get back on the right path that we were supposed to be on.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it back to Eric. I am seeing some through the Q&A, some really great ideas for venues like Civic Plaza and the airport. So if you have ideas, put them in there and we'll make note, even if we don't respond directly. Thank you. Eric, can we have you
this might be a
table?
question for you, Julie. Will this incredible exhibition travel as a whole unit? So maybe talking about the travel schedule coming up with the accompanying documentary.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, it's an interesting question and challenge. This type of exhibition, you know, it's a really unique institution that embraces it in the way that Amerind has. Following Amerind, it will be on display at the Natural History Institute, which is a small nonprofit out of Prescott, Arizona, and we're looking forward to that venue. You know, it's this bridge between the arts and sciences that also brings up all these challenging questions that some institutions are really eager, if not hungry, to have this conversation at this point in time, and others might be more wary of embracing such, you know, heated topics sometimes. But the timing is certainly critical. But really, it's these sorts of recommendations or word of mouth or recommendations that can go a long way. A lot of you know, more typical institutional venues are, you know, a year or two out in their scheduling, but we have the time. It's still going to be an issue in a couple of years, so and longer. So again, your comments are welcome on that.
And we just had a question about whether the exhibit is still up at Amerind, and yes, it is, and it will be up through January of 2022. And we do have the documentary film playing there in our gallery all the time. And I understand the documentary, and we'll send out that link, is also available through the service of Vimeo for anybody to see it at any time. A question from Sabrina. Can you speak more specifically on the current status of recovering from the problem of Peabody and the Central Arizona project taking water from the N aquifer? I know Kayenta Mine and the Navajo generating station have been decommissioned, but what about other water draws that are going on in the state, and how is water being set aside for Diné and Hopi communities in current policy?
Roger, and do you want to take that on to start?
Sure. I think the Hopi and Navajo participants can speak more directly as to what is going on currently, especially with all the infrastructure investment during COVID. There's a lot happening. I think the issue of the groundwater that was so heavily impacted when they were pumping it to slurry coal to another coal-fired power plant out of what's called the N aquifer, the Navajo sandstone aquifer, that lowered wells and dried up springs, and there may be no recovery for those springs. In terms of the surface impact of the coal mines up there, the Kayenta and Black Mesa mines were the largest strip mines in the world when they were first opened up. They've since unfortunately been surpassed by other strip mines, but the surface reclamation is way behind schedule. Peabody has already declared bankruptcy not too many years back, and it's uncertain whether or not it can be held accountable for the full surface cleanup. There's drainage off of the strip mines that includes toxic chemicals that were used in the explosives that gets into the water, et cetera. So that it's both the groundwater reclamation and the surface reclamation, I think, are works in progress, to be polite.
Who else would like to speak to that? I think all of our panelists probably have perspectives. Glory.
When we were in Tuba City during the boot camp, we spoke to the Navajo water resource person, and he said that that water could be made available to families' homes, but the problem was they were individual homes that were far apart, miles and miles apart, whereas it'd be easier if people live close together, like in Tuba City, you know, everyone lives there. There's a lot of people, they have water. But to try to get water long distances, you know, it's a huge reservation. It would be so expensive. And so he said that that was a big problem. And the same with getting like Wi-Fi anywhere to everybody up there. It would be the same thing. Fiber optics, you know, getting that going, it would be so expensive as well.
Thank you. And that, you know, that same conversation is when Ernest joined us. And I think that Ernest, you also spoke to that issue at in your presentation, that, you know, geographically, the proximity between the houses can be so far that infrastructure isn't realistic. And so the filter project is, you know, as a solution to those individual households. Is that, that's part of your objective? Is that correct?
Yeah, that was kind of the main issue of it, is because of the water that was being drawn from the Navajo aquifer, which was contaminated with high levels of arsenic, along with other metals, uranium and vanadium, all due to the mining around the Navajo reservation. The Peabody coal. Coal was one thing that was brought up as I researched, is that once it's, you know, withdrawn from the earth, it starts to oxidize and then changes its components, and then you get arsenic off. So you got these trucks hauling these big old rocks of coal around, and, you know, they fall off. So that's when they run over them, and pretty soon you got the dust. Coal dust flying around. So when it rains, then you got the wash coming down into these containment ponds. Once those filled up, then they start going down. The wash is contaminating all the surface waters that Roger was saying. So that was something that we had brought up. And yeah, the tribe had dug 2 wells northern from First Mesa, about 15 miles up towards Hard Rock. That was one of the main issues, was getting that clean water that was up there up into the communities. So the main issue was the funding for this project. So it had been brought up back in, I think, 2001, when the EPA had dropped the arsenic standards from 50 parts per billion to 10 parts per billion, where it is now. So since then, Hopi's been out of compliance with the regulations there. So with our Black Mesa Trust filter project, along with the Clean Water Foundation, we were trying to hopefully address the arsenic issue, to address it with the water filters into these homes. So it'd be kind of like a temporary band-aid until the hemp project, the Hopi arsenic mitigation project, which is the one to bring in the clean water into the communities. So it was just basically a temporary Band-Aid right now until the infrastructure gets built and we get the clean water in. So it was something that, you know, we had to do right away because we were noticing that there was a high rise in cancer rate going up, and we were starting to notice some of the youth getting sick and stuff like that. So that was something, you know, I wanted to address, especially after coming back from Standing Rock back in 2016, which was another water issue with the pipeline there. So that my main goal was to address this arsenic issue for the community.
Thank you. Jane.
Yeah, I just want to, you know, reiterate and point out something I'm sure everybody knows, but water and energy are so tightly linked. And so a lot of the, you know, health issues, the environmental health issues on the reservation are linked to abandoned, you know, coal mines and uranium mines. You know, not all the issues, but a lot of them. And, you know, being a political junkie, I'm kind of, you know, I'm addicted to the news a little bit. And I feel like, you know, if you look into the details of some of the current infrastructure bill, and, you know, there's more Native representatives in higher government agencies than there ever has been before, you know, including a number of members of the Diné group. And so, you know, I'm hopeful if, you know, the parts of the bill that are supporting alternative energies on tribal lands will go, you know, if that's supported, that could do a lot towards building clean energy projects and helping with economic development. And then also kind of buried in the infrastructure plan is funds to clean up sites, and particularly to clean up sites on native lands, because this is not just a problem in Arizona, it's an enormous problem for Alaska Natives. The military just bailed on sites and leaving barrels and barrels of toxic chemicals. And so it's a big, big issue of environmental cleanup in areas where populations are small. You know, people, there aren't a lot of people, and they tend not to have the resources and the power to advocate for the expensive cleanups that's required. So anyway, I see it as part of infrastructure, and I hope you do too. And, you know, I encourage you to look at the bill and, you know, communicate with your representatives about these pieces if you support them.
Jane? Eric?
Question from Lois. Children are our future. How can the issues we've been talking about today be shared with them, educating them about water issues in communities, that sort of thing?
Who would like to speak to that? How can we bring these topics to a youth audience?
I can start a little bit. I think, you know, we, about 2 weeks ago, this was one of the Flagstaff High School's Flagstaff Arts Leadership FALA, I don't know what it stands for, Academy, you know, premiered the video to younger artists as part of their Social Justice Day. And I think we had like 180 people online viewing the documentary and asking questions. So, you know, I have 2 kids that just are in college now, you know, and over the last few years, they've been so, like, they and their friends have just been so involved in environmental issues. And so I'm just super hopeful, because I do feel like, you know, they're growing up learning about climate change from the beginning. And so, you know, they're far more receptive to understanding the science and doing something about it. And I think, you know, to the degree that, you know, the documentary is available for free. And, you know, for anybody on this call, if you have access to, you know, any youth schools or clubs, just send us an email and we'll work with you to set up an event.
Thanks, Jane. And just to add to that, you know, the documentary took the place of some of the live programming we had planned during the course of the exhibition. And as things reopen, we'll see the direction that, Amerind and Natural History Institute might be able to bring some of those to light. But I think it's interesting, as a parent and an artist and just observing the ways and the levels that kids engage with art. I think that just having art as a resource to processing information can be really valuable. And I don't mean that in an arts therapy sense necessarily, but just how can art be a vehicle to communicate ideas as they grow and as they foster. So just exposure to things like this exhibition or the documentary might just get their brains thinking a little bit how are these artists approaching this from all sorts of different angles. There's no one answer, but lots of different ways to explore. I'm interested personally in some of those ideas. I'll turn it back over to Eric if you have any other questions that are coming through.
Well, I did kind of wonder if maybe Ernest and Glory could speak to the youth in their communities and how they're thinking about climate change and thinking about water issues.
Absolutely, thank you.
I can start. I've worked with kids, and kids are pretty responsive in the schools. If you have art, they love art. And if you include science with art, they love it. They'll stay with you. And I think that maybe the documentary can be shown in the schools on the reservation as well. I know Tuba City has an academy, Diné College, and other schools that I think would welcome this documentary, because it's about their communities, it's about their future. And I know that the tribes are very concerned about their future generations, way out, some 7 generations out. And they are worried about, the future of their children. So this would be a good way to introduce the climate change issue.
Definitely, Glory, I'll follow up with you on that. Thanks. Ernest?
Yeah, with me, I definitely do want to reach out more out to the youth. When I first started this idea on the project that we're doing now, I did a couple presentations. First one was at the First Mesa Elementary. It was kind of like a parent-teacher conference. There was some youth there. As I presented our project to the parents there, one youth reached out and was kind of interested in the water. So during that time, he got involved into the science project that they were doing, the class was doing. So his idea was to go into the water. So what he was doing was trying to figure out the arsenic issue. What does it do to plants? Like our crops. We use our water to grow our crops and stuff like that. So he did this little experiment. What he was doing. Not really sure exactly how it came out, but it was something that I felt deeply, touched by, that I was able to present something that this youth was, able to kind of comprehend and got more interest and more involved into something with that could help, the people here. So hopefully I can reach out more into the schools this year as soon as the COVID protocols, get lifted and stuff like that. But yeah, that was something I wanted to do. But right now I just kind of been going around trying to get this project, still going, and plus receiving more filters in at the same time. That was something I wanted to do, though, reach out to youth more.
Thanks, Ernest. And as these collaborations continue to evolve, perhaps we could consider continuing to link your project's presentation with the video and things like that. So we'll keep going with that.
Yeah, definitely. I'd be happy to.
Question for Glory and really all the artists in the show, but I know some of you work with them, but Glory specifically. Did the body of your work as an artist, were you already considering water issues, or did your collaboration in this Parched project take you in new directions as an artist? And will that continue with you into the future?
Well, I had done art about water before, and the gallery I'm with in Tucson, Raíces Taller, has an annual monsoon show. So we usually have art related to water on hand for that purpose. And I think I had been making these weaving before for other projects, other shows. So when Parched came, it was perfect. It just kind of fit what I was to do with it. And mainly using natural materials as well, you know, things that are biodegradable. I was trying to use those more because of the plastic issue, and just handmade, using handmade objects. So I'm trying to do more of that. But water is so important and so sacred that Parched came along just in time, and I'm very grateful that Julie and others organized it, and I'm participating in it, and I'm very happy about it. Very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. And on the flip side of the coin, question for Jane and Roger and Ernest. So your work inspired these artists. Did these artists inspire you in some way to look at your own work differently, or think about how you're presenting your work to the world differently? And we start with Jane.
Sure, thank you. I feel like I'm talking a lot. Yeah, you know, I think, you know, I love communicating to different audiences in different ways. And I love working with people that are, you know, also interested in communicating. And so, you know, I feel like I learned a lot from the artists in terms of, you know, finding out what they were interested, like what, you know, and it was interesting because the boot camp, it's a horrible name because it makes it sound like it's just this awful experience, but it was actually a really enjoyable, interesting. It was just busy. You know, essentially, you know, providing so many different sites and so many different issues. And then, you know, I saw pieces of the boot camp in pretty much every single artist's work. And so it was really interesting to me to watch what different people picked up on, and then they went and learned more about it and then brought that back to me, both in terms of like the content and then also, you know, the way that they opted to express it. And so, you know, I feel like, you know, I was talking with some scientists yesterday, and it's like, you know, we really, you know, this whole venture is a work in process, because it's like, you know, the scientists are excited to teach the artists about science, but really, and which is great, right? And it's, you know, one of the reasons I'm really interested in doing it, but it's like our job as scientists to also learn more about art and learn, you know, how, you know, all, you know, the everything from like the technical issues of the different media to, you know, how thinking about how people experience art and how people understand art, and you know, what artists, you know, are looking to do, and what their, you know, their perspectives both about the process and the product. And so, you know, I just feel like it's a very enriching collaboration, and that, you know, and it's not a clash, you know, it's really very much, we're all interested in these issues and we approach them and think about them differently. And so working together expands all of our minds, both in terms of understanding the issues and then also in terms of understanding how to express and communicate.
Ernest, do you want to respond to that? Were you inspired?
Yes, actually. You know, this being my first project and being involved in this type of media, it was very interesting and very, like I said, very honored for me to be a part of this. Because at first, I thought I was just going to present my project. That was it. I didn't think, you know, anything and more would be become of it. But I do love collaborating with Kathleen, Miss Velo. Her project was very interesting to me because I never knew a photo graphic paper, you know, it could be done like that outside of a camera. So that was something inspiring for me to see how she did that, how I could help her achieve her goal. So, but yeah, and seeing the other artists' projects, Clee's two projects were very interesting, both medias. And plus seeing the pictures of images of the difference on how water is used and where it's used at. That was something, you know, interesting to me as well. But yeah, most of all of the artists' ideas were visually comprehensible, and I guess it just really depends on the person on what the outtake of it is. But to me, I understood, you know, where they were coming from and what the idea was. But yeah, definitely this project is something to go see.
Roger, would you like to?
Sure. Every one of the artists' work inspired me. You know, Glory, your work was breathtaking. You know, it's
Thank you.
wonderful to be included. In terms of inspiring me in my advocacy work, a month ago, there was an editorial written by the vice mayor of the town of Carefree about how important the Central Arizona Project is to Carefree's existence. Carefree is a suburb of Phoenix that didn't really come into existence until after the Central Arizona Project came online. And they get all their, or most of all their water from the Central Arizona Project. And I read the editorial, and instead of writing an editorial that, you know, might have pointed out what the vice mayor didn't include, I wrote him a nice email and asked if he wanted to have a phone conversation. And we scheduled that for an hour, and he's retired from the U.S. Navy, and you know, part of the whole homeowners association. And he listened. And after that, I said, you might be interested in this documentary around an exhibit called Parched. Would you like me to send you the link? And he said, yes. And he watched the whole thing. He also, I asked him, how much do you pay for your water? And he says, I don't know, but I'll find out. And so we're still in a dialogue. So it's inspired me, and I've already seen the value of the documentary in communicating with people in a way that is maybe more effective than me just trying to hammer on them with my vision of reality. So thank you, artists. And thank you, curator.
Thank you. I can't think of a better way to end the conversation, given the time constraints. Those last two questions really wrapped it up really nicely. But I think, Roger, just go back to what you said in reference to Cleese, just reminding us we need to further this dialogue, and how this, the art in itself shapes these conversations, and the artists are taking this out as part of our, cultural conversations. So thank you. And thanks, Eric. I'll let you wrap it up.
All right. Well, thank you, Jane and Julie, Ernest, Glory, and Roger for being here today. It's certainly the tremendous work that all of you do and all of your collaborators did really makes for a beautiful exhibition, and it is as powerful in Flagstaff as it is in southern Arizona, where the Amerind is located. Once again, the exhibit will be at Amerind through January of 2022. We do have upcoming talks by more of the Parched artists where they get a whole webinar to themselves. I encourage you to visit the Flagstaff Arts Council website where there's some more information about Parched. And when we follow up with our email to everybody who's registered today, we'll be sure to include that link on Vimeo so that you can watch this video anytime that you want at home. Thank you all for I know we didn't get to all the questions today. There were lots of them in our box and they were all wonderful. Thank you for being here and spending time with us and thinking about these issues and talking about them together. The only way forward, I think we can all agree as a community, is talking about the hard things together, as Cleese said in his portion of the documentary. So thank you very much today. On behalf of the Amerind. Take care, be well,
Enjoy your
and we hope to
weekend.
see you again soon.